Welcome to another edition of the Show Me Amazing Teachers podcast, where I'm on with a lady that I just met today, Miss Roni Hollis. And Roni, we were talking before we came on the air, and you teach at Van Buren. And
Yes.
we're going to talk a little bit about teaching, but this is really a different kind of a talk. I'll kind of tell everybody how we met today. We just met this morning.
Okay.
Yeah, and basically, on the website, justwintoday.com, if you follow the site, people that are listening to this, I put these stories out. And sometimes the story is something goofy or something silly. Sometimes it catches on. Like I wrote a story earlier this week that like 2,000 people read already about a kid named Bobby Hatchett, who's a really good player, and where he lost a tough game, and after the game was over, he didn't make an excuse, and it was just a great example for other kids to follow. Well, then I was sitting at my desk last night, and I was thinking I want to write a story about my cousin Terry Bell, who was my hero growing up. He played at Scott County Central, graduated in 1987. Terry was a great player, and I wanted to think that what's the best Terry Bell story that I can tell. And the best Terry Bell story is when we beat Van Buren in the state sectionals, 61-58, close ball game. And my favorite part of that story is about the guy that guarded Terry, a guy named Mike Hollis, who is your late husband. And so
Yes.
when that story made its rounds, I put it out last night. I got a text from Pete McBride, who's a good friend of mine, a coach over at Eminence. And I think Pete and some other coaches from that part of the state that follow our website, I think you said it was Jared Kelly who sent the story over to you. And so I've talked enough. I'll kind of let you take it from there.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on tonight. This article that you wrote just completely blew my mind this morning as I doing my morning routine that includes, rising pretty early. I am a school teacher, and so get up early anyway. Have been a farmer's wife. I was married to Mike for 13 years before he was killed in an accident on December 29th, 2014. And so my morning routine of being an early riser, I get up and I have my cup of coffee every morning and I have my time with God. And now that I am a widow, I kind of just reaccept reality every morning. That Mike's no longer here. His Marine Corps picture and the flag that the Marines gave me the day of his funeral sits above our fireplace. And I kind of sit and I look at them every morning and I just kind of prep myself for another day without him. So I'm sitting here this morning having my cup of coffee and checking my social media, and I open up my Facebook Messenger, and there is a message from Jared Kelly. And Jared and I have known each other for several years. He used to work at Van Buren, of course, but we're not, socially connected otherwise. And so I was like, well, I wonder what Jared's sending me a message about. And it's your article about the Iceman. And I noticed at first, I think, well, why is he sending me this article? And then he had commented that, hey, I thought you would enjoy reading this. And as soon as I open it up and I noticed the picture of Terry and Mike, and instantly I recognized that is Mike. And even though we weren't together in high school, that was like, our first lifetime. Mike and I didn't get together until later in life. And so I opened this article and I'm reading through and I'm thinking, well, okay, but why is Mike's picture on here? What in the world does this article have to do with him? And I found out in just a few words when I see this part that just starts unfolding of this excitement and this mutual respect between two ball players. And I read about your cousin's complete, and I guess to me it almost felt like he was in awe that there was a player brazen enough to come up against him, and it was Mike Hollis. And
absolutely.
And so I read this article, and instantly, even just after that first couple of sentences mentioning Mike, I just lose it. I mean, I cry all over myself and my cup of coffee. And, December's a tough month for us because, of course, it's approaching December 29th, which is the day we lost him. And it's like December 1st comes, all 3 of these years we've been without him, and it's just I develop a pit in my stomach, and it's like the grief just grips you even harder. And so it's just a month of dread anyway. And I hate to say that about the holidays because I absolutely love Christmas and the true meaning of Christmas and all the family and the togetherness and all that kind of stuff. But since Mike's death, I mean, he passed away 4 days after Christmas. It's just not the same anymore. So our month of December is usually a very, very difficult one. And yesterday I had decided, and several months after Mike passed away, I had started a blog about 4 months after he passed away. And several months after he passed, I met, online, just like you and I met today online. I met a widow sister. We call each other Wisters, and we started a company called Still His, and the title is based off of my blog. And I used to sign all of my blog posts with hashtag Still His. So we met and we started this business, Still His, to encourage, and to help however we can support fellow widows and widowers and to really build a faith-based community around this. So I decided yesterday, okay, I've got to do something through Still His to help other widows right now at this time because it's difficult for all of us through the grieving process. And so I need to start something because it's really hard for me. So maybe if I can help make it easier for somebody else, that's going to in turn help me. And so I started this hashtag, My Light, because I kept thinking, okay, I keep going back to John 1:5, and it's something along the lines of, the light is in the darkness does not overcome it. And so I try to find a little bit of light in the darkness of grief anytime that I can. Some days it feels near impossible. The closer we get to December 29th, it seems very impossible. But I started that campaign yesterday, and the first hashtag, My Light, that I shared was a picture of our son Connor and me. And then this morning, on the second day of me trying to find some kind of light, your article came into my inbox.
I mean, if people are listening to this, they just got the goosebumps. I mean, seriously. I mean, like, that's incredible.
It was. It was absolutely just, I mean, I cried for probably 10 minutes before I could even get my vision back enough to finish reading the article. And then it just overwhelmed me. So I just couldn't believe that the timing that, oh my gosh. So I immediately messaged Jared and I was like, oh my gosh, you have no idea what this means to me. And instantly too, I thought, I've got to find this guy who wrote this article. Like, I don't know where this is coming from. I've never heard of justwintoday.com. I've got to figure this out. And, of course, this was immediately in my head, and at the same time, I've got to go wake up the boy. But, I share the article out to Mike's mom. I share it out to his oldest son, Tristan, and I share it with my sister and my brother-in-law, and I go wake up Connor. And I sat on the bed beside him, and I was like, dude, you've got to read this article about your dad. And he's, half asleep, 13-year-old, and he's like looking at me like I'm crazy. He's like, what are you talking about? And I said, Connor, this guy wrote an article about his cousin who was like this awesome ball player. And buddy, there's so much of daddy in this article. Like, your dad was the only person ever who could guard this guy and like stop him. And he almost did it before he found out. Like, you've got to read this. So he was like, well, send it to me. Don't read it to me. Just send it to me. And, of course he cried too, but it's just, I've not been able to get it out of my mind at all today. I've read it about 50 times today.
Wow. I mean, it's just an incredible coincidence. And of course, when I wrote the article, I've never met Mike. I don't know Mike. I only know Mike through the story. And like I said, this, for me, my cousin Terry, watching him as a kid, he was, 9 or 10 years older than me. So watching him as a kid, he was just larger than life. And then as I got older, like I talk about in the story, as I got older and I got to be, pretty good. I was never as good as him, but I was pretty good. And I like to play a lot. I love basketball. My cousin would take us around and play. And we would, try to, talk him, hey, come play with us at the park. Or, hey, we used to always play at this guy's farm. He had this great outdoor basketball court, and we would try to get him to go out there and play with us. And Terry would just kill us. He would just kill us. Yeah. But when we would go play and he would talk about this game, he would talk about how at that time, Scott County Central was just starting to run to win 7 state championships in a row.
Right.
And like I said in the story, people look back at that run and go, wow, they just dominated. But really, it was a razor-thin margin in 86 and in 87. And then they can tell you in 91 they barely won. There was a game in, I think it was 89, they won in double overtime. Just there's all these near misses in that run of 7 state championships in a row. But Terry talked about for them how Van Buren would come to scout them. And Van Buren would sit over in the bleachers with these little wire-rimmed notebooks, and they would they would take notes, and then he would talk about how that they played the game in Poplar Bluff, which is just up the road from Van Buren, but is a little bit further drive for the Scott County Central fans. So it was like a home game for Van Buren. And Terry said when we came out that night, he said it was like everybody came out of the hills for that game, and how the crowd was. And he talked about the Van Buren players having lightning bolts and Nike signs like shaved in the side of their head, and like just his description of the players and the game was just phenomenal. And I mean, I'm sitting there, as probably like a 14, 15-year-old kid eating this story up, and that's what I grew up on. I mean, that's what I grew up on, was these stories and these things. And Mike was the central figure. I mean, because Terry told me a lot of. I mean, I'm telling you, he told me so many basketball stories. And that he played against other good players, and he had other challenges for sure. And, there were teams that beat us somewhere along the line. But the respect that he had for Mike, and just in this story, how Terry could run a mile in probably about 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I mean, he was the fastest mile runner we ever had at Scott County. And my point is, he was in phenomenal physical condition. The guy did not get tired. And he said at the end of that game, he was so tired he couldn't take his own shoes off. And so just how hard Mike made him work, how hard it was, the challenge that night. And again, when I wrote this, I never got to meet your husband, but just I couldn't tell the story about Terry without telling the story about Mike. And so for all of that to happen the day that you're starting these other initiatives that you're trying to start, with your own website and the things that you're going through in your own life and what December means for your family, it kind of goes full circle with what I said at the very end of the article, which is you never know what you're doing right now and how that is going to impact somebody else. And when I wrote that, I was kind of speaking in the abstract, like, I wasn't talking about myself at all. I just thought, maybe somebody will read this and like it. I didn't know that it would have such a profound impact. Right.
And there's so much more to the article that resonates with me than it's just a basketball story, or it's just even a mutual respect between Terry and my husband. Mike was on go all of the time. Like, for you to talk about how hard he hustled, how hard he played, that basically he was making Terry earn that.
Absolutely.
That's how Mike spent his entire life. That man didn't know the word quit. He never stopped. He never gave up. Sometime it became a point of contention between us as husband and wife, because it was like he was just on go so much, and it did worry me as a wife often that, he's going to get hurt. It's something's going to happen someday, because he had so many business ventures. He had so many irons in the fire between being a farmer full time. I mean, and that, at that time we had a large farm of, almost 1,200 acres.
Oh, wow.
And so to farm full time, to he was working for Missouri Rural Water Association at the time he passed away. He was a training specialist, and so he traveled around the state and he taught certification courses for those seeking license to operate a water or wastewater treatment plant. He was gone, often. And in the meantime, how the accident actually occurred was he had decided that the travel with Missouri Rural Water was getting a little too much for our family, because, our son Connor was 10 at the time. Mike's oldest boy, Tristan, was, about to turn 18 and graduate high school. And Mike's like, look, I've missed so much of Tristan's life, not only from, the divorce, but then from all my travel for work. And here I have another son who's 10, and I've missed so much of his life because of travel and work. I need to figure out how can I establish a business myself without having to travel so much. So he had purchased a concrete plant about 20 miles from our house in Birch Tree is where the concrete plant was. And he had purchased this plant probably about a year and a half before he passed away. And he was really getting himself established in the name, for the concrete industry. And he was doing dirt work, backhoe operator and, dozer services and all this kind of stuff, and really getting himself established in that. And he had full intentions, once January rolled around, that he was planning to resign from his Missouri Rural Water position so that he could be home every night. And he went to work one day at the concrete plant and had a couple of concrete jobs to do that day. And it was just a regular Monday. We were in our second week of Christmas vacation from school, and Connor and I were here at home. And, had cleaned house, put away Christmas decorations, all that kind of stuff, hoping to enjoy my second week of break and just kind of chill and relax. And about 1 o'clock that afternoon, I received a text, actually from Tristan's mom, saying that they'd heard maybe Mike had an accident and gotten hurt that day, and asked me if I could check and see what was going on and let them know. And anyway, I won't go into details because it's too difficult to replay, but he was hurt at work, and he took a pretty hard hit to his head in the back of one of the concrete trucks, and he passed away there at the plant in Birch Tree. And so it just completely takes the wind. I mean, it's my breathing becomes labored right now, even just kind of rethinking about it and reliving it. But it's difficult beyond anything I've ever had to encounter or deal with. And it's just he passed away in such an unexpected, tragic way. Not that anyone can be prepared for losing your spouse or
Absolutely.
Your parent or a child. Not by any stretch am I trying to say that's an easier way to go about losing somebody, because it's not. But it just completely blindsided us. Life was good. We were happy. We were in love. We had 2 healthy boys. We had a farm. He was doing very well with his personal business to get established, that we were going to be financially okay for him to pull away from that other job. And then my world just was gone in an instant, and I didn't get to say goodbye. And I cherish every story that anybody has to tell, because it's been 3 years without him, and I miss his voice, and I miss all the laughter. And that man had such a good laugh, and he loved life, and he went hard all of the time, and he just had such passion about farming, and he had such passion about his kids and what he needed to do to become a better father and to become a better husband. And after 13 years of marriage, we had finally gotten to the point that we had it nailed down. We had it. We were going to grow old together on this farm and sit on the porch and watch our grandkids. And, so just to hear these kind of stories, it brings him back to life for me for a little bit, and it lets me see him and feel him and hear him. And it just fills my heart. Just fills my heart.
Well, and I'm glad that I was able to do that for you. And like we talked about before we came on the air, I did it completely by accident. I wasn't trying to be a good guy or anything. I was just telling a good story. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a really good story, and it's a good story because your husband's in it, and then it's not a story without Mike. It's not. And the thing that I really admire about your story, switching to you for a minute, is on Just Win Today, and to kind of tell my own story, the brief version, because everybody that listens to my site has heard it before. I was in a bad car wreck. I got hit by a drunk driver, guy going 126 miles an hour, pimping a prostitute, car full of cocaine. I get hit. I almost got killed. So that changed my perspective on life. And when I was a basketball coach, my mentality was to try to win practice every day. I looked at I graded practice like it was a win or a loss. I actually gave it a letter grade, A, B, C, D, F. And try not to get too many F's, because my mentality was, if you win that day of practice, then you're going to win games if you're having really good practice every day. And kids want to focus on the game. It's easy to focus on the game, but let's focus on the process of getting better today, just today. And so then when I had my wreck, it kind of put that focus into real life for me. Like I could sit here and have a bad day and feel sorry for myself and woe is me and whatever. And really the point where I had a turn for me was probably about day 15 after my wreck. I was getting pushed back to my room from one of my rehabs and therapies. And I think the nurse, her name was Jackie, she could tell that I was starting to feel sorry for myself and asked, why did this happen to me? And she leaned down and she whispered in my ear and she said, David, do you see that lady in front of you? They were pushing a woman on a bed in front of me. She was laying down flat. And I said, yeah. And she said, that woman had a wreck the day before you did. She's about the same age you are, and she is a quadriplegic. She'll never walk again. She'll never go to the bathroom by herself again. And she goes, I know that what you're going through is hard, but you're going to be okay. You're going to walk again. You're going to be okay. And it kind of, made me say, I'm going to stop feeling sorry for myself. And that's kind of where Just Win Today was born, was, I'm going to figure out a way to try to make today a good day. Or if today is the worst day of my life, I'm going to try to find something out of today that I can take away that's positive, or that I can help somebody else. And not that my situation is anything like yours, but I admire you that you were able to take the absolute worst day of your life, or the worst day that could happen to any of us, to lose somebody that we love in such a tragic and sudden way. But you have tried to just inspire other people and use your platform, because that there are other people out there like you, and it never gets easier, but it is easier if you go through it together, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And there's no way to make that day a win, but the way that you guys have done this, it just inspired me. And so that's why I reached out to you today and just said, hey, I do this thing. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but I think it would really touch other people to hear. And I think there's a line in your video that captured it best, where you said, this was not God's plan, but this growth that I've had is God's plan, And, I just think, man, it's just speechless. I don't even know what to say to that.
Well, I can promise you that this was not my mentality in the beginning. My mentality was simply, how do I take my next breath without him? How do I raise our son without him? How do I pay this stack of bills that, I've never had to pay? He took care of all the big bills, as I call them. I make a teacher's salary. So, that sure wasn't very helpful when we have this huge farm. And those first few months, and when I learned of the extra debt that I wasn't aware of, the magnitude, the amount of the debt I was carrying now by myself with a 10-year-old son and a teacher's salary completely. It actually, when I discovered the true dollar amount, I had my first of a million now panic attacks.
Oh my goodness.
And I had never experienced one before, scared me to death. Had to have my 10-year-old text one of my best friends, Michelle, who's a nurse practitioner, and be like, okay, you've got to text her and figure out what we can do, because I've never passed out before, and it was just so overwhelming. And, so those first few months, it was literally, excuse me, how do I breathe? How do I step forward? My employer at the time, I was teaching high school English over here at Van Buren. My principal, Mark Wood, couldn't have asked to have a better principal at the time. He was so good, like, you take all the time you need. We've got you, whatever we've got to do. He did that. My superintendent at the time said that. I mean, everyone was so supportive. It was just insane. But even all that support, you've got to decide yourself, kind of like you did that day in the hospital. You've got to decide yourself to take that step. People can give you so much love and so much support and so much grace, but until you decide internally in yourself that you're ready to give yourself grace, you can't do it. And it took wallowing in my own self-pity for months, going, I'm going to lose my mind. I legit am going to lose my mind. I don't know what to do. And so my sister, Amy, encouraged me to start writing, because I've written my entire life. And she's like, you've got to get it out. You're somehow going to have to get it out. Have you ever thought about blogging? And of course I hadn't, but that's where my writing journey really began. And, it just became this thing that I thought, okay, if there is any way I'm going to be able to turn my pain into purpose, it's going to have to be right now. And I know that I'm not the only person out there whose husband has passed away tragically and suddenly, and has been left with this overwhelming responsibility of every part of life now, just completely in my lap. And, I do my best. I don't, not every day is a great day. I struggle, but I can say now that almost 3 years later, I do cry less often. I do smile and laugh more often. I can finally see that, hopefully there's a future that includes, love even again someday, happiness again someday, a full family again someday. But, it didn't come easy. And I can tell you the two things that I have told every widow who I've made contact with over the past 3 years through my blog and then through the business Still His, is there's only two things that you can do, and that is to pray and that is to breathe. And in the beginning, that literally is the only two things you can do to get through. And eventually there's going to be hope, and eventually you're going to smile, and eventually you're going to be okay. You're never going to be whole again, but you're going to be okay. And you're going to find a new normal, and you're going to find a way to step forward. And that's another thing too. We don't ever move on from this kind of grief. You just don't, but you do move forward. And I've just always felt like, widows don't like to be told this was part of God's plan, or, well, God had a reason for taking Mike, or, all that kind of stuff. And I've got my faith, and thank goodness I do. And I am so proud to be a Christian and to love my God. But the way Mike died that day, in a tragic and sudden way, the way that he left two boys who loved him and still love him, and the way he left me and the rest of his family, that wasn't part of God's plan. God didn't make that happen, just like He doesn't make all the other bad stuff happen in the world. Bad stuff just happens. But God does have a purpose behind every person's experience with these bad things. I can make a choice, And I can sit here and I can be depressed every single day. And you know what? There are some days that I don't leave my house. I don't change out of my pajamas. And me and the boys spend the day here and we shut out the world. And I can make a choice every day of how I attack the day, just like you try and encourage everybody to make a choice every day to find something you can count as a win. And so I just have got to push through and every day try and find something I can see some light in. And that's what Still His is about, is trying to encourage and help widows, widowers, you know, people of faith, because it's not just widowhood that struggles, that creates faith-based struggles. I mean, you know, it's any kind of tragedy, any kind of hardship. We all face something that makes us go, okay, time out. Why me? Why now? How did this happen? But then you muster up the strength to pray and to breathe, and after enough prayer, it kind of shakes you, and you go, okay, you're right. You didn't do this to me. This wasn't your plan. Your plan is now, how am I going to grow? How am I going to learn? How am I going to be better from this? And so that's what I try and do as often as I can.
And we're speaking the same language. I mean, it just resonated with me so much what you just said and what we've said to each other back and forth throughout the day in messages, and that is, life is going to knock you down. And again, what happened to you is just, incomprehensible. I mean, it's the worst day ever, and you're still standing, girl. You know what I mean? Like you're still standing. Like that is a win. And as hard as it's been to get through, and as like you and I were talking about your son and Mike's older boy, and as hard as it's been on your boys, I mean, for them to keep taking one step forward, one step at a time. I mean, not only is that what he would have wanted, I'm sure, but that's also what what you have to do. I mean, you have to just keep moving ahead, and like you said, pray and breathe. I love that. I'm gonna borrow that one from you. So
okay.
So
okay.
I mean, it's just a phenomenal story. Can you tell people the name of your website one more time, just so that I'm sure that they've got it?
Sure. It's just www.stillhis.com. Yes. And my widow's sister, Kimberly, she's actually stationed out on the East Coast. She and I met on Twitter. She started following my blog after her husband, Rashid, was actually killed in a hit-and-run accident.
Oh, goodness.
And she caught on to that hashtag Still His that I signed my blog posts with, and was like, okay, girl, we got to figure something out of how to make this some kind of a movement. And that's what we did.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's amazing, and I tell people this all the time. Kind of like what you're doing with your blog and your movement, Still His. You are trying to provide a service to people, a support group. You called it an online support group. You had a name for it that I thought was really good.
Well, I don't remember what I called it earlier.
It was something like that, like an online community for people who, where people could interchange those thoughts and ideas and the struggles together. And, that's kind of way that I look at mine also is, and I tell people this, I get more out of this than the people who read it, far and away, because I'll send a story out and I'll get feedback from people that I could have never, just like today. Now, this is probably the most profound example. I mean, because of what you said, not just because of the sheer coincidence, but the timing of the coincidence is what is so remarkable. But I get something like this from people where, a firefighter in New York one time sent me a message, or, just the most random people will say, hey, I read this. Hey, I saw this. It meant a lot to me. And that was the whole point of the article about Terry and Mike is you have no idea how what you're doing today is going to impact other people. And that impact is not always positive. Sometimes you have this was an accidental positive impact that I had today. Sometimes we have an accidental negative impact. So just be mindful of that and try to help somebody. Every day you get up, try to help somebody. And so I didn't mean to, but I'm so glad that I did today.
Yeah,
and so
me too.
That I call that one a win. That's a win. So, Roni, stay on the phone when we hang up here because I want to get some other information from you. But people check out her website, Still His, and Roni, thanks for joining us. It's an amazing story.
All right, thank you so much. And if anybody else has any good Mike Hollis basketball stories out there, let us know.
Absolutely. And so, thanks everybody for joining us. Check out the website justwintoday.com. JWT.